My son texted me, "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it intimate." I stared at that message on my phone screen for what felt like an eternity, reading those cold, clinical words over and over again. My first grandchild was about to be born, the baby I'd been dreaming about holding for 9 months, and I was being told I wasn't welcome. Not with a phone call, not with an explanation, just a text message that might as well have been a knife to the heart. If you've ever been pushed out of the most important moments by someone you raised, if you know what it feels like when your own blood treats you like a stranger, if you've ever realized that the family you thought you had was just an illusion, pull up a chair and stay a while, because this story's gonna hurt before it heals, and it's gonna teach you something about what real family actually means. I'm Thomas Williams, 67 years old, been retired for 2 years now from my job as a senior engineer at ExxonMobil here in Houston, Texas. Spent 43 years climbing my way up in that company, working overtime, traveling for projects, also I could provide for my family and leave something meaningful behind. My wife Margaret and I, we raised our boy David with love, discipline, and the understanding that family comes first, always. At least that's what we thought we taught him. Margaret passed 3 years ago after a long battle with breast cancer, and losing her nearly broke me in half. But David was there for me during those dark months, helping with funeral arrangements, checking on me regularly, making sure I wasn't drowning in grief and loneliness. We'd grown closer than we'd ever been. 2 men who'd loved the same incredible woman, supporting each other through the worst time of our lives. That's why what happened next hurt so much more than it should have. About 6 months after Margaret's funeral, David started bringing around this woman named Jennifer. Pretty girl, ambitious, worked in marketing for some tech startup downtown. At first, I was happy for him. My boy deserved love, deserved someone to share his life with. Margaret would have wanted him to find happiness again, to build a family of his own. But Jennifer changed things from the very beginning. During family dinners at my house, she'd make subtle comments about the decor being dated, about how the neighborhood was charming but not really their style. She'd check her phone constantly, like being there was some kind of obligation rather than a privilege. And slowly, gradually, those family dinners became less frequent. The phone calls became shorter, and my son started feeling more like a stranger. When David announced they were getting married, I was genuinely happy for them, even though something in my gut told me this woman was going to be trouble. I offered to help pay for the wedding, wanted to be involved in the planning, but Jennifer had already decided everything would be small and intimate. Their favorite words, I was learning. I ended up writing a check and sitting in the 3rd row like any other guest, watching my only child marry someone who looked at me like I was taking up space in her perfect picture. And if you're wondering how a text message about my grandchild's birth led to me changing my will that very night, cutting out my son completely and leaving everything to people who actually treated me like family, well, hit that subscribe button on Grandpa's Diaries because this story's just getting started. And by the end, you're going to understand that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born with. David used to be my best friend, especially after Margaret got sick. During those 18 months of treatments and hospital visits, that boy was my rock, my constant companion through the nightmare of watching the love of my life fade away. We'd sit in those sterile waiting rooms for hours, talking about everything and nothing, remembering Margaret's laugh, sharing stories about her terrible cooking and her amazing heart. I remember one particularly bad night when Margaret was in intensive care after complications from chemotherapy. David drove straight from his law office to the hospital, still wearing his expensive suit, and found me crying in the chapel. He didn't say anything, just sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders. We stayed there until sunrise, 2 grown men holding on to each other while the woman who'd made us a family fought for her life 3 floors above us. "Dad," he said that morning, "whatever happens, we're going to get through this together. You and me, we're all the family we've got left, and that's enough." Those words meant everything to me then, and they made what happened later hurt so much worse, because I believed him. I believed that Margaret's death had bonded us in a way that nothing could break. After the funeral, David made it a point to come by every Sunday for dinner. We'd cook together. Neither of us was much good at it without Margaret, and watch football or old movies. He'd tell me about his cases. I'd share stories from my engineering days. And for a few hours each week, the house didn't feel so empty and quiet. Those Sundays became the highlight of my week, the thing I looked forward to all the way from Monday morning. When Jennifer came into the picture, those dinners started changing. At first, she'd come with David but spend most of the time on her phone, making it clear she'd rather be anywhere else. Then she started suggesting they couldn't make it because they had other commitments: her friends' parties, work events, weekend trips to her parents' place in Dallas. David would apologize, promise we'd do dinner the following week, but the pattern was clear. I was being phased out. The worst part was watching my son change. David had always been considerate, thoughtful, the kind of man who opened doors and remembered birthdays and called just to check in. But under Jennifer's influence, he became distant, distracted, like he was embarrassed by his old life, by me. When I'd call, our conversations became shorter and more superficial. When I'd ask about their plans, everything was still being decided or we'll let you know. Margaret had always been the buffer between David and me, the translator who helped us understand each other when we got stubborn or prideful. Without her, and with Jennifer actively working to separate us, that relationship started crumbling faster than I knew how to fix it. I tried talking to David about it once, but he just said I was being oversensitive and that Jennifer was still adjusting to the family dynamic. What he really meant was that I needed to adjust to being less important in his life. The engagement happened fast, 6 months after they started dating seriously, and the wedding planning was a masterclass in exclusion. Every time I asked about details or offered to help, Jennifer had already handled it or decided it wasn't necessary. The guest list was tight, the venue was small, the budget was under control. They didn't want my input, my involvement, or apparently my presence beyond showing up and writing a check. The first real warning sign came during their engagement party, which I found out about 3 days before it happened. David called me on a Thursday afternoon, sounding rushed and uncomfortable, to let me know they were having a small gathering that Sunday at Jennifer's parents' house in River Oaks, one of Houston's most exclusive neighborhoods. "Just something casual, Dad," he said, but I could hear Jennifer talking in the background, her voice sharp and insistent about something. Jennifer's parents wanted to meet some of our friends, nothing fancy. When I arrived at the Hartwell family mansion, and it was a mansion with a circular driveway and columns that belonged in a movie, I immediately understood why I'd been an afterthought. These weren't David's friends, they were Jennifer's crowd, young professionals who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. The men wore polo shirts that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, and the women carried purses that could have paid my mortgage. I introduced myself to Jennifer's parents, Richard and Patricia Hartwell. Richard owned a chain of upscale restaurants across Texas, and Patricia was involved in what she called philanthropic endeavors, but which seemed to mostly involve organizing charity galas. They were polite to me, but distantly so, like I was someone's employee rather than the father of the groom. "Thomas, isn't it?" Patricia said, her smile perfectly practiced. "David's told us so much about you. An engineer, how wonderful. Such practical work." The way she said practical made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. I spent most of that party standing by myself, watching David work the room with Jennifer's hand firmly planted on his arm, steering him from conversation to conversation like he was her personal accessory. When he did introduce me to people, it was always brief, perfunctory. "This is my father, Thomas. Dad, this is Jennifer's friend from college." Or Dad, "Meet Jennifer's cousin from Austin." Never any stories about our relationship, never any warmth or pride in his voice. The worst moment came when I overheard Jennifer talking to a group of her sorority sisters by the pool. I'd gone to get some air, feeling suffocated by all the polite small talk and obvious wealth, when I heard my name mentioned. "David's father seems nice," one of them was saying. "Very down to earth." "Oh, he's sweet enough," Jennifer replied, her voice carrying that particular tone women use when they're about to say something cutting. "But honestly, he's from a completely different world. David's trying to be patient, but it's hard when someone doesn't understand your lifestyle, you know?" Some people just weren't raised with certain expectations. I stood there behind a decorative column, feeling my face burn with embarrassment and anger. This woman was talking about me like I was some kind of charity case, like David was doing me a favor by maintaining a relationship with his own father. And the worst part was that none of her friends seemed surprised or uncomfortable with what she was saying. That drive home was one of the longest of my life. I kept replaying Jennifer's words, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong, what I'd done to deserve that kind of dismissal. I'd worked hard my entire life, provided for my family, treated people with respect and dignity. But somehow, in Jennifer's world, that wasn't enough. I wasn't refined enough, wealthy enough, sophisticated enough to deserve a place in my own son's life. When I got home to my quiet house, I sat in Margaret's favorite chair and wished desperately that she was there to help me make sense of what was happening. She would have known what to say to David, how to handle Jennifer's obvious disdain. Margaret had a way of cutting through nonsense and getting to the heart of things that I'd never mastered. Without her, I felt lost, like I was fighting a battle I didn't understand with weapons I didn't have. The pregnancy announcement should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. David called me on a Tuesday evening in March, his voice full of excitement that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. "Dad, I've got incredible news. Jennifer's pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather." For a few seconds, all the tension and hurt of the past year melted away. This was my grandchild he was talking about, my blood, my legacy. "Oh, David, that's wonderful. Congratulations. How's Jennifer feeling? When's the baby due? Do you know if it's a boy or girl yet?" "Slow down, Dad," David laughed, and it was the first time I'd heard genuine warmth in his voice in months. "It's still early, due in November. We just found out yesterday. Jennifer's a little nervous but excited. We both are." I started making plans immediately, began researching cribs and car seats, thinking about converting my home office into a nursery for when they'd visit, imagining teaching my grandchild to ride a bike in the same driveway where I'd taught David. Margaret would have been over the moon, would have already started knitting baby blankets and planning nursery themes. I felt closer to her in that moment than I had since she died. But as the months progressed, that initial excitement was gradually replaced by a familiar feeling of exclusion. Doctor's appointments happened without me knowing about them. When I'd ask about Jennifer's health or the baby's development, David's answers became vague and brief. "Everything's fine, Dad. The doctor says everything's progressing normally." I offered to throw a baby shower, thinking it might be a way to bridge the gap with Jennifer, to show her that I wanted to be part of this journey. "That's really thoughtful, Dad," David said. "But Jennifer's already got something planned with her friends and her mom. You know how she likes things to be organized." Organized. That was the new code word for without you. The worst part was being shut out of the preparations that should have included me. When they registered for gifts, I found out from my neighbor Rosa, whose daughter worked at the same Target where they'd set up their registry. When they had the gender reveal party, a girl, they were having a little girl, I saw the pictures on David's Facebook page along with everyone else. When Jennifer had complications in her 7th month and spent 2 days in the hospital, I only found out because David's secretary mentioned it when I called his office. Each exclusion felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship, but I kept telling myself that things would change once the baby was born. Surely, when my granddaughter arrived, Jennifer would understand that family was more important than whatever social anxiety was driving this distance. Surely David would remember that I was the one who'd taught him how to be a father, who'd shown him what it meant to put your children first. The due date came and went. November 15th passed with no word from David. November 16th, 17th, 18th, nothing. I sat by my phone, checking it obsessively, wondering if my granddaughter had been born and no one had bothered to tell me. Finally, on November 19th, I couldn't stand it anymore and called David's cell phone. "Dad, hey," he answered, sounding tired but happy. "I was just about to call you. Emma was born this morning at 6:47 a.m., 7 pounds, 3 ounces, perfectly healthy. Jennifer had a rough labor, but she's doing great now. Emma." My granddaughter's name was Emma, and she'd been alive for 12 hours before I even knew she existed. That's wonderful, David. I'm so happy for you both. When can I come see her? There was a pause, just long enough to make my stomach clench with dread. Well, Dad, Jennifer's pretty exhausted, and the doctors want to keep visitors to a minimum for the first few days. Why don't we plan something for next week? Next week. My granddaughter was born, and I was being asked to wait a week to meet her. But I swallowed my disappointment and agreed, because I thought that was just the beginning, just Jennifer being cautious about germs and recovery. I had no idea that text message was coming, the one that would change everything between us forever. The text message arrived on Sunday evening, exactly 9 days after Emma was born. I was sitting in my living room, holding the little pink teddy bear I'd bought for my granddaughter, watching the news and thinking about finally meeting her the next day. My phone buzzed with what I thought would be details about visiting hours or maybe a picture of the baby. Instead, it was a message that felt like a physical blow to the chest. Dad, there's been a change of plans. You won't be joining us at the hospital tomorrow. Jennifer prefers to keep things intimate right now with just immediate family. We'll arrange something when she's feeling more up to visitors. Thanks for understanding. I read that message 5 times before it really sank in. Immediate family. I wasn't immediate family. I was the baby's grandfather, David's father, the man who'd raised him and loved him and sacrificed for him, but somehow I didn't qualify as immediate family. Jennifer's parents, who I'd met exactly twice, were apparently more immediate than I was. The word intimate was what really got to me. This wasn't about Jennifer's health or the baby's safety or hospital policies. This was about me not being the kind of person Jennifer wanted in her intimate moments, not being refined enough or wealthy enough or sophisticated enough to deserve a place in my own granddaughter's first days of life. I sat there in that quiet house, holding that teddy bear, and felt something break inside me that I knew would never heal. This wasn't just about visiting the hospital. This was about my place in David's life, my role in Emma's future, the legacy I'd thought I was building for the next generation. Jennifer had made it clear that I was unwelcome, and David had chosen her comfort over my heart. That night I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house, looking at all the pictures of David growing up. His first day of school, his graduation from law school, his wedding day where I'd smiled and pretended everything was fine. In every photo, I saw a father who'd done his best, who'd loved unconditionally, who'd never imagined that his devotion would be repaid with casual dismissal. At 3 in the morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went to my home office, turned on my computer, and pulled up the contact information for my estate attorney, James Morrison. I'd been meaning to update my will anyway since Margaret's death, but I'd kept putting it off because the primary beneficiary was so obvious. David would inherit everything: the house, my retirement accounts, my life insurance, the stocks I'd been accumulating for 40 years. But as I sat there in the dark, thinking about that text message and what it really meant, I realized something important. Why should I leave my life's work to someone who clearly didn't value me while I was alive? Why should Jennifer, who found me so distasteful, benefit from my death? Why should Emma grow up with money from a grandfather she'd been taught to keep at arm's length? I drafted an email to James Morrison, asking him to schedule an appointment as soon as possible to completely restructure my will. I wanted everything, every dollar, every asset, every piece of property, to go to charity instead. The American Cancer Society, in Margaret's memory. The Boys and Girls Club where I'd volunteered for years. Local scholarships for kids whose parents worked blue-collar jobs like I had. If David wanted to keep things intimate with just Jennifer's idea of immediate family, then he could do it without any expectation of inheritance from the father he'd decided wasn't immediate enough to matter. That money would go to people who might actually appreciate it, who might understand the value of hard work and sacrifice and putting family first. I sent that email at 4:17 a.m. and went to bed feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. For the first time since Margaret died, I was taking control of my own life instead of letting other people's expectations and judgments dictate my happiness. The new will was signed and notarized within a week. James Morrison tried to talk me out of it, said I might regret such a drastic decision, that maybe I should wait and see if things improved with David. But I was done waiting. Done hoping, done begging for scraps of affection from people who'd already made it clear where I stood in their priorities. Thomas, James said, reviewing the documents one final time, this is a substantial estate we're talking about. Between your retirement accounts, the house, and your investment portfolio, you're leaving nearly $800,000 to charity. Are you absolutely certain David has no idea what he's walking away from? He's not walking away from anything, I replied. He's made his choice about what kind of relationship he wants with me, and I'm making mine about what kind of legacy I want to leave behind. This money will do more good for kids who need scholarships than it will for a man who already has everything he wants. Word of my decision spread faster than I'd expected. David's secretary at the law firm knew James Morrison socially, and within 2 weeks David was calling me, his voice tight with confusion and anger. "Dad, I heard you changed your will. Is that true?" "It is," I said simply. "Why would you do something like that? What's this about?" The question was so perfectly obtuse, so completely disconnected from everything that had happened over the past year, that I almost laughed. "David, when's the last time you asked me how I was doing? When's the last time you included me in anything important in your life? When's the last time you made me feel like I mattered to you?" "That's not fair, Dad. We've been busy with the baby, with Jennifer's recovery. It's not personal. It's entirely personal, son. You texted me to tell me I wasn't welcome to meet my granddaughter because your wife prefers to keep things intimate. You've spent the last year making it clear that I'm an embarrassment to your new life. So I've decided to make sure my money goes to people who might actually appreciate it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, David said, "Dad, you're being dramatic. We can work this out. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? Jennifer's doing much better and you can meet Emma." The fact that he thought he could fix 18 months of rejection with a single dinner invitation told me everything I needed to know about how little he understood what he'd done. "I'm not interested in being a charity case in my own family, David. When you decide you actually want a father in your life, not just someone to fulfill an obligation, you let me know." I hung up the phone and felt that same sense of peace I'd experienced the night I decided to change my will. For the first time in years, I was setting boundaries, demanding to be treated with the respect I'd earned through decades of love and sacrifice. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to exclude me from their intimate family circle, Jennifer and David had actually freed me to build real relationships with people who valued me for who I was. My neighbor Rosa, whose husband had died the year before, started joining me for dinner twice a week. Her grandson Carlos, a college student studying engineering, began stopping by for advice about his classes and career plans. These people didn't care that I lived in a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood. They didn't judge me for wearing the same jacket to church every Sunday or driving a 10-year-old car. They appreciated my stories about Margaret, my advice about life, my willingness to help with household repairs and homework questions. In their company, I remembered what it felt like to be valued for the right reasons. 2 years passed without meaningful contact from David. He'd call on my birthday and Father's Day, brief conversations full of small talk and careful politeness, but no real connection, no acknowledgement of what had broken between us. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Emma was walking, talking, becoming a real little person, but I remained a stranger to my own granddaughter. Then, last month, everything changed. David showed up at my door on a Thursday evening, looking older and more tired than I'd seen him since Margaret's funeral. He asked if we could talk, really talk, about what had happened between us. "Dad," he said, sitting in my living room where he'd spent so many Sunday dinners, "Jennifer and I are getting divorced. It's been coming for a while, but it's finally happening. And I've been thinking a lot about how things went wrong between us." He told me that Jennifer had been having an affair with one of her colleagues, that their marriage had been crumbling for months, that he was finally seeing clearly how she'd manipulated him into pushing away everyone who truly cared about him. He asked about my will, about whether there was any chance I'd reconsider, about whether we could rebuild what we'd lost. I listened to everything he had to say, and then I gave him the only answer I could. "David, I don't care about your money problems or your marriage problems or your career problems. What I care about is whether you actually want me in your life, or whether you just want me as a backup plan now that your first choice didn't work out. The conversation didn't end the way he hoped it would. I didn't immediately forgive and forget, didn't rush to change my will back, didn't promise to be the safety net he'd thrown away when it was convenient. But I did agree to meet my granddaughter, to start building a relationship with her that wouldn't depend on Jennifer's approval or David's convenience. Emma is 3 years old now, and she calls me Papa Thomas. She comes to my house every other Saturday, and we work in the garden together, the same garden Margaret planted 20 years ago. She doesn't know about the complicated history between her father and me. She just knows that Papa Thomas makes good pancakes and tells funny stories, and always has time to read her favorite book one more time. I never did change my will back. Most of my estate is still going to charity, to scholarships and cancer research and youth programs. David will inherit Margaret's jewelry and some family photos, things that have sentimental value but no monetary worth. It's enough, because now our relationship isn't built on expectations of inheritance or obligation or guilt. Here's what I learned from all of this. You can't force people to value you, but you can choose to value yourself. You can't make someone include you in their intimate moments, but you can build intimate relationships with people who actually want you there. And sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you were born with or the one you raised, but the one you choose to love you back. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been excluded from important moments by people who should have wanted you there? Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and a relationship? Have you ever discovered that real family isn't about blood, but about who shows up when it matters? I want to hear your stories because I guarantee they're filled with more strength and wisdom than you give yourself credit for. And if this story reminded you that your worth isn't determined by other people's guest lists, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got more stories about finding your way back to yourself when the people you love decide you're not enough for them. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is getting uninvited from places you never really belonged anyway. I'll see you next week with another cup of coffee and another truth about what it really means to be family.